15-year-old Luke Patterson shivered beneath his thin, tattered hoodie as the icy wind whipped down the empty alley. Snow had started falling again, blanketing the city in a suffocating silence. The streetlights cast a dim, flickering glow on the icy pavement, giving the world an eerie, abandoned feel. Luke stuffed his hands deep into his pockets and crouched near a dumpster, hoping to block out the wind. It was just another winter night. Lonely, cold, and unforgiving. Luke had been on his own for almost a year. After his father was sent to prison and his mother abandoned him, he had nowhere to go. Foster homes were nightmares filled with broken promises and cruel foster siblings. The streets were harsh, but at least they were predictable. Yet tonight, the cold seemed to bite deeper than usual. Hunger clawed at his stomach like a wild animal. Luke sighed and leaned his head against the icy brick wall, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. His eyes drooped in exhaustion until a distant sound snapped him back to attention. A low, mournful whimper echoed from further down the alley. Luke sat up, ears straining. It wasn't human. Another whimper came, louder this time, followed by the faint rustle of paws slipping on ice. Curious and wary, Luke rose to his feet and moved cautiously toward the sound. As he turned the corner, his eyes widened. A large, shivering German shepherd lay huddled near a pile of cardboard boxes. Its ribs were painfully visible beneath its matted fur, and one of its front paws was twisted at an awkward angle. The dog's amber eyes stared up at Luke, filled with both fear and desperate hope. "Hey, buddy," Luke whispered softly, crouching a few feet away. He knew how animals on the street could be. Scared, aggressive, or unpredictable. But this dog didn't growl or bark. It simply whimpered again, struggling to lift its injured paw. Luke's heart ached. He knew what it felt like to be abandoned and helpless. "Looks like you've had it rough too," he murmured, inching closer. The dog didn't move, though its eyes never left his face. Slowly, Luke extended his hand. After a few tense seconds, the shepherd leaned forward and gently sniffed his fingers. Luke let out a small breath of relief and smiled. "You're not so scary," he said. "I think we could both use a friend right now." He looked around, knowing he couldn't leave the dog here. It wouldn't survive another night like this. But where could he take it? Luke had no shelter, no food, and barely any protection from the cold himself. Still, he couldn't abandon the animal. "All right," he muttered, shrugging off his hoodie. "You're in worse shape than me." He draped the hoodie over the dog, who gave a small grunt of appreciation. Then, with great effort, Luke managed to lift the shepherd into his arms. The dog was heavier than he expected, and his arms trembled with the strain, but he forced himself to keep going. He couldn't let this creature freeze to death. An hour later, Luke stumbled into an old abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but at least it would block the wind. He gently set the dog down on a patch of dry, dusty floor and collapsed beside it, panting from exhaustion. The shepherd licked his hand, a small gesture of gratitude. "Yeah, you're welcome," Luke chuckled weakly. "But you'd better not expect room service." The dog's ears twitched, and it let out a soft, almost amused huff. Luke lay back and stared at the cracked ceiling. Despite the biting cold and his empty stomach, something about having the dog beside him made the night feel a little less lonely. "Guess we need names, huh?" he mused aloud.
I'm Luke.
"And you look like a Max. How's that sound?" The dog tilted its head, as if considering the suggestion, then barked softly. "Max it is," Luke smiled. "All right, Max, we've got each other now. We're gonna figure this out." The next few days were brutal. Luke scrounged through trash bins for scraps, sometimes going without so Max could eat. He found a piece of wire and fashioned a crude splint for the dog's paw. It wasn't perfect, but it helped Max hobble around without too much pain. The bond between them grew quickly. Max was more than just a stray, he was smart, alert, and loyal. He stayed by Luke's side constantly, as if guarding him from the dangers of the streets. And there were plenty of dangers. One night, as Luke and Max huddled together for warmth, a group of older teens approached them in a dark alley. "Hey, kid," the leader sneered, A tall, wiry guy with a scar across his jaw. That's a fine-looking dog you got there. Bet someone would pay good money for it. Luke's heart pounded in fear. He knew these types, gang members who preyed on the weak. If they took Max, he might never see him again. Back off, Luke growled, stepping protectively in front of Max. Scarjaw chuckled darkly. Tough guy, huh? Don't be stupid. Hand over the mutt and maybe we'll let you walk away. Max bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Looks like your dog's got more fight in him than you. Another teen laughed. Luke clenched his fists. He wasn't strong or armed, but he wasn't going to let them take Max. Not after everything they'd been through. The gang surrounded Luke and Max, their shadows stretching long in the dim streetlight. Luke's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them, not with Max injured, and there was no way he could take them all in a fight. But he couldn't let them take Max. That dog was the only friend he had left. Last chance, kid, the leader warned, stepping closer. Give us the dog, or we'll take it by force. Luke swallowed hard and glanced at Max. The shepherd's growl deepened, his teeth glinting in the faint light. Even with a wounded paw, Max was ready to fight for both of them. Luke knew he had to do something fast before things got violent. Fine, Luke said, raising his hands slowly in surrender. You want him? You can have him. But if you think you're going to make any money off him, you're wrong. The gang hesitated, confused by his sudden change in tone. What do you mean? Scarjaw asked suspiciously. Luke took a deep breath and stepped forward, forcing himself to sound more confident than he felt. This dog's got a busted paw. He's sick and starving, and he's probably got fleas and mange. You think anyone's gonna pay for a half-dead mutt? The leader frowned, glancing at Max, who was still growling but clearly in rough shape. Luke seized the moment of doubt. Go ahead, he continued, shrugging. Take him. He'll die in a few days and you'll have wasted your time. Or you could just leave us alone and go find something actually worth stealing. The gang members exchanged uneasy looks. They hadn't expected this level of defiance or reasoning from a street kid. Scarjaw spat on the ground. You're lucky we've got better things to do. Come on, guys. With a final glare, the group turned and disappeared into the night. Luke stood frozen for a moment, hardly believing they were gone. When the last of their footsteps faded, he collapsed to his knees, trembling with adrenaline. Max nudged his shoulder, his growl softening into a concerned whine. I can't believe that worked, Luke gasped, rubbing Max's head. Good job, buddy. You scared them off just enough. Max licked his face, and Luke let out a shaky laugh. But the relief was short-lived. They needed to move. The gang might come back, and it wasn't safe to stay in one place for long. They wandered the city for hours, slipping between alleys and abandoned lots. Luke's limbs were numb from the cold, and hunger gnawed at his insides like a knife. He found a half-eaten sandwich in a trash bin and split it with Max, though neither of them got much from the pitiful meal. As dawn broke, they stumbled across a small park on the outskirts of town. Luke spotted a secluded bench near some trees and decided to rest for a while. The park was quiet, the early morning light casting a golden glow over the frost-covered grass. For a moment, the world seemed peaceful. Luke sat on the bench and pulled Max close, sharing what little warmth they had. His mind drifted to memories of his old life, back when he had a warm bed, regular meals, and parents who cared. But that life felt like a dream now, something distant and unreachable. Why does it always have to be so hard? He whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't expect an answer, but Max nuzzled his side as if to say, I'm here. We'll get through this. Luke sighed and stroked the dog's fur. You deserve better than this, you know? Maybe I should try to find your owner. Someone's gotta be looking for you. Max's ears twitched at the word owner. For a moment, Luke thought he saw a flicker of recognition in the dog's eyes, but it passed quickly. Later that morning, as they rested by the park, a woman approached them. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a heavy coat with a scarf wrapped around her neck. Her kind eyes softened when she saw Max. Hey there, she greeted gently. That's a beautiful dog you've got. Luke tensed, ready to defend Max if necessary. But the woman didn't seem threatening. She crouched a few feet away and extended her hand, letting Max sniff it. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she assured them. "My name's Karen. I work with a local animal shelter. Is he yours?" Luke hesitated. He didn't know if he could trust her, but something about her seemed genuine. "Yeah," he lied. "His name's Max." Karen smiled warmly. "Max, who? That's a strong name. He looks like he's been through a lot. You too, for that matter." Luke looked away, his jaw tightening. "We're fine." Karen didn't press him, but she reached into her bag and pulled out a small packet of jerky. She offered it to Luke, who stared at it suspiciously before finally accepting. He tore it open and handed most of it to Max, who eagerly devoured the treat. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Karen said softly. "I've seen a lot of kids like you. Life out here isn't easy. If you ever need help, the shelter's not far from here. We have food, blankets, and a warm place to stay." Luke wanted to believe her, but experience had taught him not to trust easily. "Thanks," he muttered, shoving the empty jerky packet into his pocket. Karen stood and gave Max one last pat on the head. "Take care of each other, okay? And remember, you don't have to do this alone." As she walked away, Luke watched her go, conflicted. Part of him wanted to follow her, to take the chance that maybe someone really cared. But another part, the part hardened by years of survival, told him to keep his distance. Trusting the wrong person could get him and Max killed. Still, her words lingered in his mind. "You don't have to do this alone." That night, Luke lay awake beside Max in the warehouse. He couldn't stop thinking about what Karen had said, or about the gang from earlier. Sooner or later, someone else would come after them. He needed a plan, a way to protect both himself and Max. But the question gnawed at him. Could he really trust anyone? Max curled closer to him, letting out a content sigh. Luke rested a hand on the dog's side and whispered, "We'll figure it out, Max, somehow." But deep down, he knew time was running out. Over the next few days, Luke and Max tried to stay out of sight. They moved between abandoned buildings and back alleys, always on alert for trouble. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that the gang might still be looking for them. He had learned to be cautious. Out here, a single mistake could be fatal. But the harsh winter was taking its toll. Luke's energy was fading fast. He hadn't eaten more than scraps in days, and Max's injury wasn't healing as quickly as he'd hoped. Max limped beside him, doing his best to keep up despite the pain. One night, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Luke collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath. His vision blurred from exhaustion. Max whimpered and nudged his face, but Luke barely had the strength to respond. We need help," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He hated admitting it, but they wouldn't survive much longer like this. Max barked softly, as if encouraging him. Luke took a deep breath and forced himself to stand. He knew there was only one place they could go. The shelter Karen had mentioned. It was a risk, but it might be their only chance. The shelter was located in a modest brick building near the edge of the city. The sign out front read bright Horizons Animal and Youth Shelter. Luke hesitated at the entrance, his mind racing with doubts. What if it was a trap? What if they reported him to social services or tried to take Max away? He shook his head. He didn't have a choice. Max needed care, and so did he. Luke pushed open the door and was immediately greeted by warmth and the scent of fresh food. A cheerful woman at the front desk looked up in surprise. She wasn't Karen, but her smile was just as kind. "Hello there," she said gently. "Can I help you?" Luke swallowed hard. I'm looking for Karen. She said she worked here." The woman nodded. "You mean Karen Pierce? She's not here right now, but I can call her." "What's your name, sweetheart?" Luke hesitated, then mumbled, "Luke." The woman glanced down at Max, who stood protectively by Luke's side. "And this must be Max," she said softly. "You both look like you've had a rough time. Let's get you warmed up while we wait for Karen. Okay?" Luke hesitated again but finally nodded. The woman led them to a small lounge area with a heater and a few blankets. Luke sank into a chair, shivering as his body began to thaw. Max curled up beside him, sighing contentedly. Within minutes, a steaming bowl of soup was placed in front of him. Luke hesitated only a moment before digging in. It was the first real meal he'd had in days, and he felt tears sting his eyes as he ate. Karen arrived about an hour later, her expression softening when she saw Luke and Max. "Hey," she greeted warmly, crouching beside him. "I'm glad you came. You both look like you've been through hell." Luke nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "We didn't have anywhere else to go." "I understand," Karen said gently. She reached out to pet Max, who wagged his tail weakly. "How's his paw doing?" "Not great," Luke admitted. "I tried to make a splint, but it's not enough." Karen stood and motioned for him to follow. "Come on. We have a vet on staff who can take a look at him. And don't worry. You can stay here as long as you need." Luke hesitated again. "You're not going to call anyone, are you? Like, child services?" Karen's expression grew serious. "We won't force you into anything, Luke. But if you ever want help getting off the streets for good, we can talk about it. For now, let's just focus on getting you and Max healthy." Relief flooded through Luke, and he nodded. Maybe, just maybe, he could trust her. The shelter provided them with food, clean clothes, and a safe place to sleep. Max's paw was treated by the on-site vet, who praised Luke for his efforts to care for the dog despite his circumstances. For the first time in months, Luke felt a glimmer of hope. He and Max were no longer fighting alone. But that hope was soon tested. A few days later, while Luke was helping clean kennels in the shelter, Karen approached him with a worried expression. "Luke, can we talk?" she asked gently. Luke tensed. "What's wrong?" Karen hesitated. "Someone's looking for Max. A man named Daniel Cole. He's a retired military officer, and he says Max is his dog." Luke's heart sank. "What?"
"No. Max is mine."
"I believe you, Luke," Karen said softly. "But this man brought photos and proof. Max's real name is Apollo. He was a trained service dog, and he went missing after an accident last year." Luke felt a rush of panic. "You're going to give him back, aren't you?" Karen sighed. "I haven't made any decisions yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Daniel seems like a good man, but I need to understand how you feel about all this." Luke clenched his fists. He couldn't lose Max, not after everything they'd been through together. But deep down, he knew this was complicated. If Daniel was telling the truth, Max might belong somewhere else. "I don't know," Luke whispered, his voice cracking.
"Max saved me."
"He's all I have." Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. "No one's going to take him from you without your say. But maybe you should meet Daniel. Hear his side of the story. You don't have to decide right away." Luke hesitated, torn between fear and the possibility that Max had another life waiting for him. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll meet him." "Thank you," Karen said. "You're brave, Luke. We'll figure this out together." But as Luke stared at Max, who lay peacefully nearby, he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would change everything. The following afternoon, Luke sat nervously in the shelter's small conference room. Max lay at his feet, sensing Luke's tension and staying close. Karen had explained that Daniel Cole would be arriving soon, but Luke still wasn't sure he wanted to face him. The idea of losing Max sent a wave of fear through him. The door opened, and a tall man in his early 40s stepped inside. Daniel Cole had a commanding presence, with broad shoulders and a clean-shaven face that bore the hardened expression of someone who had seen more than his share of hardships. His piercing blue eyes softened, however, when he saw Max. "Apollo?" Daniel breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Max lifted his head at the name, his ears twitching. For a moment, he seemed uncertain, sniffing the air as Daniel slowly approached. "Hey, boy," Daniel said softly, crouching a few feet away. "It's me. You remember, don't you?" Max hesitated, glancing back at Luke, as if asking for permission. Luke's throat tightened. He didn't want to let Max go, but he couldn't ignore the recognition that flickered in the dog's eyes. Slowly, Max stood and limped toward Daniel, sniffing his hands. Daniel gently stroked his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Daniel whispered. "You were the best partner I ever had." Luke's stomach churned. It was clear Daniel loved Max, Apollo, and had been searching for him for a long time. But Luke couldn't just let him go without a fight. "He's not just your dog," Luke blurted out, his voice trembling. "He's mine too. We've been through hell together. He saved me and I saved him. We need each other." Daniel looked up, his expression compassionate but firm. "I can see that, and I'm not here to take him away from you, Luke. I owe you my thanks for keeping him alive. But I need you to understand, Apollo isn't just a pet. He's a trained service dog. We went through combat tours together. He saved my life more times than I can count." Luke shook his head, anger and fear bubbling to the surface. "So what? You think that means you can just show up and take him back?" "No," Daniel replied calmly. "I don't want to hurt you, kid. I know what it's like to lose the one thing keeping you going. But maybe there's a way we can both have him." Luke frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward. "You've clearly got a bond with him. I'd never want to break that. What I'm offering is a chance to work something out. I can help you. I know how tough it is out there. If you come with me, I can give you and Max a home. A place where you'll both be safe. You won't have to struggle anymore." The words hit Luke like a punch to the gut. It sounded too good to be true. He had spent so long learning not to trust anyone. But Daniel's offer was tempting in a way that scared him. Could he really take that risk? Karen spoke up gently. "You don't have to decide right now, Luke. But maybe it's worth considering. You've done everything you can to survive. Maybe it's time to let someone help you." Luke's mind raced. He looked at Max, who had returned to his side, wagging his tail softly. Max seemed calm, as if telling him it was okay to trust again. Luke hesitated, his throat tight. "I don't know. How do I know you're not just going to forget about me once you get Max back?" Daniel shook his head firmly. "That's not going to happen. You've got my word. You don't have to do this alone anymore, Luke. Let me help." Luke swallowed hard. The walls he had built around himself were cracking. For the first time in what felt like forever, he saw a chance for something better, a real future. Finally, he whispered, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Over the next few weeks, Daniel kept his promise. He found Luke a place to stay and enrolled him in a program to help homeless youth rebuild their lives. Luke was skeptical at first, but with Karen's encouragement and Daniel's support, he started to trust the process. Max, Apollo, remained by his side through it all. Daniel visited regularly, sharing stories about their time in the military. Luke learned that Daniel had lost his family in a tragic accident years earlier, and Max had been his anchor ever since. "We're not so different," Daniel told Luke one evening. "We've both lost people we cared about, but that doesn't mean we have to stay lost." For the first time, Luke believed him. One snowy evening, Luke stood outside the shelter, watching the snowflakes fall. Max sat beside him, his paw fully healed. Luke took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel trapped or hopeless. He had a second chance, a chance to build a life worth living. Max barked happily, nudging his hand. Luke smiled and ruffled the dog's ears. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "We made it. We're gonna be okay." As they walked back inside, Luke felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. And with Max and Daniel by his side, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with possibilities. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and with it came new opportunities for Luke. For the first time in years, he was no longer fighting to survive day by day. Daniel had kept every word of his promise, ensuring Luke had a stable place to stay, food to eat, and a path forward. Karen helped him enroll in a local school, where he started catching up on the education he had missed. It was strange at first, sitting in a classroom surrounded by kids his age, but little by little he found his footing. Max, or Apollo as Daniel still called him, became a bridge between their two worlds. He would spend time with both Luke and Daniel, reinforcing the growing bond between them. The dog's loyalty remained unwavering, always ensuring that both his humans were safe and supported. But even as things improved, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't fully belong in this new life. He had spent so long on the streets that he wasn't sure how to fit into a world where people actually cared. At school, he kept his guard up, avoiding too much attention from others. He didn't trust easily, and he wasn't ready to explain his past. One day after school, Daniel picked him up in his truck. Max jumped into the back seat, wagging his tail as Luke climbed in. "How's school going?" Daniel asked casually as they drove toward a nearby park. Luke shrugged. "It's all right. I'm still getting used to it." Daniel nodded. "I get it. It's hard to adjust after everything you've been through. But you're doing great, Luke. You should be proud of yourself." Luke glanced out the window, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to believe Daniel, but doubts lingered in the back of his mind. Was he really doing great, or was he just pretending? When they arrived at the park, Daniel parked the truck and grabbed a ball from the back. Max barked excitedly, his energy renewed by the open space. "Come on," Daniel said with a grin. "Let's give Max a workout." Luke followed him to the field, watching as Daniel tossed the ball. Max took off like a rocket, bounding across the grass with a speed that made Luke laugh. For a moment, all his worries faded, replaced by the simple joy of watching Max play. "Hey Luke," Daniel said after a while, "can I ask you something?" "Sure," Luke replied, catching his breath after running around with Max. "What do you want to do with your life? I mean, now that things are settling down. Do you have any dreams? Goals?" Luke hesitated. He had spent so long just trying to survive that he had never allowed himself to dream about the future. But now, with stability finally within reach, he realized he had choices. He thought back to all the people who had helped him, Karen, Daniel, the shelter staff, and a small idea began to form. "I guess," Luke began slowly, "I want to help people, like you and Karen did for me. Maybe I could work with animals or kids someday." Daniel smiled warmly. "That's a great goal. You'd be good at it. You understand what it's like to be in a tough spot, and that kind of empathy is rare." Luke felt a spark of pride at Daniel's words. For the first time, he started to believe that he might actually have a purpose beyond survival. Over the following months, Luke worked toward that goal. He volunteered at the animal shelter, learning how to care for injured and abandoned animals. He also started opening up more at school, slowly forming friendships with classmates who didn't judge him for his past. Max remained a constant presence, his unwavering loyalty giving Luke the confidence to keep moving forward. Together, they faced each new challenge with determination. One day, Luke stood at the front of a classroom as part of a community outreach program organized by the shelter. He was there to talk about his experiences and the importance of compassion for both animals and people. "This is Max," he introduced with a smile as the German Shepherd sat proudly beside him. "He's not just a dog. He's my best friend. We've been through a lot together, and I wouldn't be here today without him." The students listened intently as Luke shared his story. He spoke about the hardships he had faced, the choices he had made, and the people who had helped him along the way. He didn't sugarcoat the pain, but he also emphasized the hope that had carried him through. "And what I learned," Luke concluded, "is that no matter how hard things get, there's always a way forward. You just have to let people in and believe that you deserve a second chance." The room erupted in applause, and Luke felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had come so far from the scared, hungry boy he had once been. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. After the presentation, Karen approached him with tears in her eyes. "You were incredible, Luke. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks," Luke said softly, feeling a lump in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you and Daniel." Daniel, who had been watching from the back of the room, stepped forward and clapped a hand on Luke's shoulder. "You're a fighter, Luke. You've earned everything you've got now." Luke nodded, finally believing those words. He had a home, a family, and a future, and with Max by his side, he knew he could face anything. Together, they walked out of the building, the sun shining brightly above. It was a new day, full of hope, possibility, and the promise of a better life.